Welcome to another episode of Outside of the Box. And I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled, to have Ray Billings from Tombstone. I mean, I'm pretty sure every person who's ever been on my show has brought Tombstone up. So that just kind of tells you.
Was it good or bad? That's
Oh
that's what I
no,
want to know.
no, it's
Okay.
all good. I mean, it's the usual stuff that you would expect. Everybody wants to fight Tombstone. That's just the way that it goes. So, yeah, I'm just really excited. We have a lot to talk about. This is going to be so different because, I really want to get into like all of the seasons and specific matches from the seasons to talk about that, I looked back on and found interesting for one reason or another.
Sure.
Because I mean, Tombstone is like when you're talking like historic and epic and everything else like that. That's the kind of robot Tombstone is, and I think that we have to
We
to
have a
really
long fight
reflect.
history. So
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
there's a lot to go over. There's a lot of fights. So sure, whatever you want to talk about is good with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Tombstone, obviously in the, what's considered the more modern era of BattleBots since 2015. But I mean, this Tombstone was essentially developed from like as a newer version of Last Rites, which you used to have, but then you use the name Tombstone from your super heavyweight version of the robot. Um,
Correct.
Adding the Last Rites is in the Combat Robot Hall of Fame, which is super amazing. I'm sure
So is
Tombstone. Yeah,
Tombstone.
yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
They both are.
You had a 74% win percentage over 6 seasons, which I mean, there are robots that have a high win percentage, but not over 6 seasons. Like that's
Right.
so impressive. And I mean, I think that everybody really just respects what Tombstone has done over the years, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Okay.
Um,
All good
yeah,
to me.
so going all the way back to the 2015 season, the first, ABC season of BattleBots, um, undefeated record, all the way up until going against Bite Force. That's really the match that I want to talk about because for me, it was so interesting. I mean, I've followed BattleBots since the Comedy Central days, so I've been watching it for a long time, and I think for me as a fan, and I'm sure a lot of fans, when seeing Tombstone go up against Bite Force, which at the time was a control bot, um, it was a little bit surprising to see the result come out the way that it did. I mean, obviously, like Paul builds great robots, and Bite Force at that time
Well,
was also like amazing. Um,
he
so
builds great robots, but he drives them real well too. I mean, you got to give him credit on all the pieces. It's a great robot. It's driven well. The team's always prepared. The robot's always 100% when it goes in the arena. So, a lot of people say he gets lucky, but I mean, when you get lucky a lot, it's not luck. He's just really really professional about what he does.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, like, what was your? I mean, I know your strategy is usually, I think probably the same thing. You take the weapon, use it, destroy the other robot. But I mean, did you have any specific strategy against Bite Force going into that because it is, a control bot?
Realistically, in that match, we were kind of running out of parts, and I didn't have a really good set of batteries on the robot, and because I didn't have any more. I mean, this was literally the last of what I had that could make the robot run at that point in time. And if I had had a new set of batteries for it instead of some that were kind of beat up, I think it could have gone the other way. We had a couple of really big hits. I was definitely causing him some damage, and then we just started to smoke it, and the weapon stopped working. And I mean, that's the nature of those events. Is it's every match is important, but it's also kind of a war of attrition. If you just keep getting beat up throughout the event, it's the guy that can keep the robot running in the top notch shape all the way to the end. That's the guy that's going to win. And we just couldn't quite do it that year.
Yeah, I mean that's what a lot of people say. It's really about durability, and I think more and more builders are finding that out, and you know creating their bots accordingly to make sure that they can last throughout. Now, you know, jumping from that season to 2016. I mean, not that 2015 was a bad season for Tombstone by any means. You just didn't get the result that you wanted at the end.
Sure.
2016, obviously you did. I mean, undefeated season, the best that you could possibly do. What's interesting though, that of all the matches that season that I want to talk about, the one that I want to talk about is the Beta fight, and the reason is because it was the only one that season that was not a knockout. You
Right.
won, but it was the only one that wasn't a knockout. And Beta in that fight landed a huge shot early, and they did manage to get a couple of shots with their hammer, but
Yep.
you kept going at them with your weapon. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen so many sparks. Like it was just, all over the place. And eventually you ended up taking the hammer. Was that your goal? Were you going for the hammer?
Well, the way that robot is shaped with the sloped wedge, and it's kind of shock mounted, so it rides on the floor really well. You kind of take what he's going to give you, and obviously, I'd like to get behind him and try, because if I could have caught the edge of that wraparound wedge, I probably could have pulled the whole thing off. But he's a really good driver. He's not going to give you the opportunity to get those sort of shots you want. And so then it just comes down to who wears the other robot down more towards the end. And if they'd judged the match halfway through, he was beating me for the first half of the match. I was just able to start really landing some hits there at the end and breaking things that were important. In fact, I don't know that they would have been able to fix it had they won that match, because they didn't have another supports for the where the hammer was, and I cut all that stuff off. I don't think they would have been able to actually make the robot work again. It was a fun match. It was kind of interesting, and one of the first big hits where it kind of bounced off the arena, we actually broke the arena clock, and they didn't have an official time on the match. We didn't know what was going on. And right there at the end, they stopped the match while I was basically sitting on top of him. And then they had to figure out where they were. And at the time, they kind of went back and forth and figured out, no, there was actually like another 10 or 15 seconds left in the match. And did we want to turn it back on for 15 seconds or just judge it where it sat and whatnot? It was actually kind of confusing at the time. Then we both agreed, yeah, we've run our game. Both robots have done their thing. Let it go to the judges. And so, I mean, it was a really close match. I mean, watching it now, I think I won. I think it was the right call. But at the time, if they'd have called it either way, I wouldn't have been surprised. It was a really close match.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Beat is a great robot. I just thought that was interesting the way it ended up. I'm curious though, like, have they done anything because of the fact that the clock was destroyed that now there's like a backup clock in case that happens again?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of clocks around. Everybody's keeping track of it, but the refs right there standing next to
Mm.
the arena, they're the ones that's kind of controlling the match pace, and they just didn't know because there wasn't anything displayed there. So, I'm sure they're aware that this can happen and have taken. I mean, BattleBots does a really good job of running the event. I'm sure they have something figured out. It was just confusing at the time.
Yeah, Tombstone is really good at breaking the arena. And that's a perfect
Yeah.
segue into the next season. um it's like so funny because I hadn't watched the 20, like, for some reason I didn't watch the 2018 season like in order. I had skipped it and then I went back and watched it, and that was such a destructive season. Like there were so many robots getting torn up, like more than I usually see. And that was no exception at the start of that, when you fought Minotaur. Um, I mean, that the arena got extremely torn up. I think that, I wonder if the schedulers were like looking at that and said, Ray won the last time that we did this, won the whole thing, won the giant nut. We have to give him a real test with Minotaur because, again, really great robot, great
Yeah.
driver, you know.
Well,
Um,
there were options where we might have fought the previous season, and there are a lot of people were wanting to see that match. And the matches that lead into the tournament, the fight night fights, they're really not that random. They're trying to come up with things that people want to see and people want to watch. And so all of my fight night fights that season were kind of vicious ones. I had really tough robots, and yes, leading off with Minotaur was a good one. And we have a brand new floor after that season, and almost 100% because of the damage in that match. I mean, it was just, I was cutting down through all of the arena. They kept putting new sheets of steel on top of the old one and just welding it in place. And so instead of having one thick piece, it was multiple thin pieces. I cut through all of them and then down into the structure that holds the floor up off the ground. And so that was their last straw. They had to rebuild the floor after that. So I'm sure I've cost the BattleBots guys a lot of money in arena repair over the years.
That's likely. I also thought it was funny because, especially like with that match, it kind of showcased you in like your prime bad guy days, where like you could just tell that you were like winning and loving it and like so confident. It was just I thought it was fantastic to go back and like remember that, because I mean you're still very confident in your matches, but it's just not quite like that level that you were back at that time.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, that was pretty interesting. Another thing that I thought was interesting though that season is the next fight was against Gigabyte, which you had actually fought Megabyte back in the days with Tombstone, and now fighting like Gigabyte, which was their newer version of that robot essentially. And that, of course, is the infamous match where you knocked the dome off of Gigabyte. And
Yeah.
they essentially said, "Hey, let's stop the match." I'm sure because I mean, at that point, like you're gonna destroy the robot, and I'm sure they didn't want that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the thing is, on virtually all events, you can tap out. You can say, I'm done. You can say, I don't want to fight anymore. And BattleBots doesn't have that in place. So they don't have the option to just say, yeah, I don't want to fight anymore. I'm done. They want you to just keep going, which for a TV show, I understand why they do it that way. But the other side of the coin is these guys have to fix this robot. And without the show on, it's just thousands of dollars worth of parts that are undefended, right? So the match is done. There's no chance he can win this match. And if he keeps moving, I have to keep showing aggression and I have to keep hitting him. That's why I'm saying, just stop moving. I'll leave you alone. Just stop. And then once he stopped, then they could count him out as being knocked out. Like he couldn't move. But I mean, it was just because he stopped moving.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it. Because I think I've talked about that with a couple of teams that I've had conversations with, is the fact that like if you don't want to get hit, then just don't move. Because if you're moving, like you never know what's going to happen. There's been plenty of examples of matches where one of robot held back because they thought that the other robot was done when in fact they weren't, and that ended
Right.
up costing them. So you have to be really careful about that.
It helps when you have people that you fought with for years. So the Gigabyte team has about the same experience. I mean, they've been doing this as long as I have. It's been over 20 years for both of us. So we have covered a lot of matches. We've been at the same events for decades. And so I know what they're going to do. They know what I'm going to do. It makes it real easy. Just stop. I'll stop hitting you. And they stopped. And we're all kind of a big family at this point. I mean, it's maybe a dysfunctional family, but it's family.
That's a big thing that I keep hearing, and really what my experience has been, since doing this podcast, is that, generally, even though it's a competition, everybody is really competitive and obviously wants to win, but at the same time, it's a big family. Everybody's willing to like help each other out, and I think like you said it best in one of the interviews that you did, that BattleBots is getting together and breaking each other's toys. That's
Very much so.
that's what it is.
Yep.
So,
That's
um,
exactly what we do.
um, So then the other match that I wanted to talk about in that season was, obviously the match against Bombshell, and I think why that's so like important to think about is, part of me wondered if, because you had beat them the previous time for the giant nut, that they felt like they had a lot to prove coming into that, because they got a chance to go back up against you, and maybe they learned some things from the last match. I think it was their wedge that really kind of impacted things.
Well,
I
of
mean, what?
course, yeah.
Yeah.
So they had, obviously they lost to me, but they were vulnerable to any horizontal before. And so when they rebuilt it, and a lot of people say they rebuilt it specifically just to beat Tombstone, and maybe there's something to that. Most of it is that they just recognized a weakness in the design and worked hard to address it. And so the front of that robot was built very stoutly. It could handle taking a big horizontal hit, like from me. Um, Unfortunately, that didn't leave enough weight to do a lot of other things, and so there was other issues with the robot elsewhere, and which is why, I mean, they beat me. They beat me fair and square. Yeah, I pat them on the back for doing well. And then the very next match, they like had one hit and then almost exploded in fire at that point in time. So it's like, yeah, it's okay that you beat me, but maybe go a little further in the tournament and actually, do something with that victory. Good guys, it's good robot. Sometimes things don't go your way, and that was one of those matches.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, that really, all in all, again, it was a very good season for Tombstone. You had knockouts in every match that you won that season. So very impressive. Going into 2019, so the first match that I want to talk about, and it might actually be one of my favorite Tombstone matches, is the match against Lockjaw. And the reason for that is because I think that it proved exactly why, like, no one can ever for a second think I got Tombstone, because you never, like, it takes a second for anything to happen. You had your back turned to Lockjaw, and I don't know, if
On
maybe
purpose.
Donald thought, oh, I got him,
Yep.
and just boom,
Yep.
boom, that was it.
So Donald is one of the better drivers in the series. So it's not, he's got a lot of experience, as much as anybody. He's really good at controlling his robot. But one of the things he is aggressive. Okay, so he's going to press advantages because he's got a lot of experience doing that. And this is one of those things where the better the driver is, the more likely they are to fall for that particular trick. And so it's really simple. We're driving around, and I get in a position where my rear end is pointed to him, and then I'll just stop. And it's a second. It's this little brief piece, and they can't not take advantage of it. They're going to grab me. They're going to push me to the wall. And he bit hook, line, and sinker. I mean, he took it. He put himself in exactly the spot I wanted to, and all I had to do was just turn around and pull his tires off. And it's one of those things where afterwards he'd be like, "Well, yeah, of course I screwed up." And from what I hear, the pits where they're all watching this match going, as soon as that happened, everybody's screaming, "No, no, don't do it!" Because everybody knew what I'd done, and he bit, and I got him. And if we fight again, he'll have some new sneaky thing to pull on me and won't fall for that again. It's just the way this goes.
It is, but yeah, I mean, I just like I don't know. I was so excited when that happened. Not because I wanted to see Lockjaw get wrecked, but it was just a fun, like, just exciting thing to see. You do that move, and then all of a sudden, two tires are gone. So that's
Right.
that's how quickly Tombstone can strike.
Well, if you have exposed tires, whatever they're mounted with, I can cut that off. And so, it's a matter of just getting in the right position to make that hit. And sometimes you get guys that are really good. They'll keep those tires away from you for the whole match. But if I get the opportunity, all it takes is just one hit and just cut them off.
Exactly, exactly. So the next match that I want to talk about that season um, is the Rotator one, and again, just because it was significant that that was Tombstone's first loss in the regular season for like ever at that point since the beginning of
Right.
2015. It just wasn't something that happened, and watching that fight, looking at, kind of Victor's strategy and using that wedge, I mean, he didn't say so, but it almost made me wonder if he looked at what Bombshell had done with their wedge in the past and thought that that would be an effective thing to do against you.
I mean, he did all the right things to win the match, and he deserved it. So it's not like he didn't do the things correctly. But there's a little piece of luck involved in this too. So his weapon height came in exact when I was upside down, and when we hit, it caught the tooth on my weapon bar kind of right in the center. And right down the bolt holes, it split in half, and I lost the tooth. And it got out of balance, and it's shaking. And once that happens, I'm toast. There's so much energy in that weapon. It is literally going to shake the robot to death. There's nothing that can stop that. And so, he did all the things he needed to. I mean, it's not like he didn't earn it, but some of that's just he got the right hit at the right time, and once I was out of balance, it was done. If that tooth had stayed together, I don't think he would have won that match. I think I would have just started pulling pieces off. Um, and did he learn things from that? He builds the rear end of that with the wedges and whatever forks or whatever he does. All of that's a lot stouter now than it used to be, which is why his robot's one of the better ones out there now. So yeah, he's taken those lessons throughout those things and improved the robot significantly. It's one of the toughest robots out there to fight now.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I'm not going to talk about anything with champions because obviously, like, that hasn't aired yet. We don't know what's going to
Sure.
happen. But being a boss, in champions, I mean, that's like a big deal.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Um,
Yeah.
and then you ended up facing Bite Force again. Although this was a different version of Bite Force because
Yeah.
Paul didn't have the weapon before. So was your strategy any different because of that? And obviously the way that the match went was very different than the first time.
Yeah. Well, okay, with the uppercut hit, I've got the horizontal. We ended up with a really unique contact between the two weapons. So his weapon was coming up as mine was coming around, and the tip of his weapon actually hit on the end of my weapon, not the cutting part, but directly on the end. And it wasn't that piece that broke. You get sort of a pressure wave down through the bar. The other end snapped off from the hit on this end. And that piece that broke off is what went through my tire and gearbox and tore out that drivetrain on that one side. So not only was I out of balance then because half the bar was missing, but one side of the drive was removed by my weapon, not by his. He actually didn't touch anything on the robot other than the tip of the weapon, and my own energy is what ended up just destroying my robot.
Well, you've said that many times that a lot of times it's really Tombstone just because of the sheer level of kinetic energy ends up beating itself more than anything
Of
else.
course.
And,
Well, I mean, that's the same for any big kinetic energy robot. So you're storing so much energy. When stuff breaks, it's because you're delivering that energy. So, I mean, if you look at any of the good kinetic, you take the top off of Gigabyte and you look inside of it, there's a million zip ties tying everything down in there because they don't want that stuff to move, right? Any of the big energy robots are like that. They're always going to be their own worst enemy. And that's what happens to me. I tear myself up.
yeah, it's like it's good being a really powerful robot, but then it can also sometimes have the negative points to it as well. So yeah, uh, looking at 2020, um, the match that I actually want to talk about, because it just was interesting for a number of reasons, is the Scorpios one. I know that they really felt that you would have like a bone to pick with them because they had beaten Perfect Phoenix at like prior to that. And also they had really been wanting to fight Tombstone for a long time. Like Zach has
Sure.
talked about the fact that he made Scorpio specifically to try and beat Tombstone. I mean, everybody wants
Mhm.
to be, try and fight Tombstone. That's what they want to do. Um, but like what I thought was interesting too is Scorpios, to their credit, was going around in that match with like their tire half coming off for quite a lot of it, because you were
Right.
able to get their tire. Um, they did end up taking off the tire of Tombstone, but I mean, really, I just thought that was a great
Kind
match.
kind of.
Yeah,
Okay.
kind of.
Um, what happened is they come into the side and I caught them with my weapon and yanked them through the tire. So it was still my kinetic energy that pulled the tire off. It was just, I was they were like a baseball that I hit and it then ran through the tire. So um and I know that the match meant a lot to them in that regard. And as it come down to it, they were dominating the match. Um, would it happen again? I don't know. I mean, we're two good robots going to the same events. We're going to end up facing each other again. And there's things I should have done differently then, that we may do different next time that might help. It's just a tough, solid robot, and he's one of the better drivers. People don't give him enough credit for that. He's actually a pretty good driver of the robot, and it's a tough team to face.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think like that there's too many people that I've talked to that are more passionate about the sport than Zach and Diana.
Very
Like,
much so. Hmm.
so yeah, yeah, definitely get props to them for being able to do that. Now, last season, the two matches that I want to talk about last season are both of your wins that you had against Mammoth and Free Shipping, just because I found them interesting for different reasons. Now, the Mammoth match
Okay.
didn't last very long. It ended up being a double count out. You got the judge's decision because you obviously did more damage to them. But the reason that was interesting for me is because Tombstone is a robot that everybody prepares for. And mostly in your case, because they know how destructive Tombstone is, and they want to make sure that they have a game plan. For Mammoth, I think it's mostly because it's such an unusual robot. And
It's
you really
very
have to have,
odd to
yeah,
work with.
you
Yeah.
have to have a different way of facing that. So like for you, what was it like to face a robot like that? Because you had never fought them before. I don't think you've ever fought Huge before. So like
No.
to fight something that different.
And they are unique. It's a strange thing to have to fight. And the what a lot of people do is they overthink it. Okay, they try to come up with, well, I'm going to get to the side and try to get a tire. I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to do that, and because they don't want him to get on top of him and get that big, huge looping spinner to start flipping you over, because that's what Mammoth's thing is. And I was like, you know what, I just have enough energy. I'm not worried about that. And so rather than try to get real fancy or cute and try to maneuver to the side or something like that, I just spun up and went in and smacked them. Um, and in my case, it worked really well. The biggest problem is we were swinging more energy this time than we have in a while, and things that used to work perfectly fine were starting to break more often now. And so, at the end there, when we got stuck in one of the kill saw slots, but I only had one side drive working. If I had both sides, I could have pulled out of it and it would have been fine. So the knockout is things that used to work okay aren't anymore, and we're going to have to make some big changes down the road to try to address some of those things.
For sure. Now the free shipping fight. very different. I mean, the reason why I liked that one so much is it was like, let's see how many tires we can take off. You got one and you just kind of kept taking off tires. It really like kind of brought back that feeling of like, this is the core Tombstone. Like this is what you expect to see from Tombstone. Your weapon did end up powering down. You didn't have the weapon, but like you had already done the damage. Like it was done.
Right.
So
Yep. Yeah. Well, so Gary and I have a long fight history. We probably have, I don't know, 15 or 20 matches against each other. We have a long fight history away from battle lines. And he usually beats me because he's just such a good driver, and he's very smothering. He's going to get on you. He's never going to let you spin up. He's just going to dictate the pace of the fight. And the only way you can beat him is to start yanking tires off and sort of remove some of his maneuverability. And he can drive better with 2 tires than almost anybody else can with 4. He's really good at controlling that robot. And even with 1 tire, he can still control it completely and drive all over the arena. So it felt that was uniquely satisfying because I got 3 of his tires, my weapon stopped working, and then it really just came down to a driving match. And I can say I beat Gary Jin in a driving match, which is actually kind of impressive. Now, I'm not going to mention the part that I had to cut 3 of his tires off first before I say that. But it was a satisfying win because, like I said, up to that point in time, he probably wins 3 out of 4 matches. So it was anytime you can beat him, it's satisfying because he's just so good at what he does.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what one thing that I wanted to ask you that I thought was interesting, and going back to Zach Lytle because he actually brought this up, is that some fans, especially because the last 2 seasons just weren't the winning record that Tombstone normally has, a ton of KOs and wins and stuff like that. And people have been like, oh, maybe, Tombstone needs to change something. Well, the point that Zach brought up is that last season he fought Blade, which is similar to Tombstone in design in some aspects, but like he said, Blade is the robot that fans keep saying they want Tombstone to turn into. But that fight that they had against Blade proved exactly why what you do works, like that you don't
Right.
need to do all of these other things because Tombstone is great as it is. I just thought that was interesting. I mean, I assume you still don't plan to drastically change Tombstone at any point.
There's all kinds of things I wanna update and do. So there's some drivetrain issues I definitely need to address, and I'm not. We made some of those changes for the most recent Remarge event, and I like some of what I did. Some things I did I wasn't happy with, so I've got further things to work with there. My biggest issue is I just got to figure out. It used to be I could just sort of mount the batteries and some foam back there to protect them, and that was enough. And it's not anymore. The robots are hitting me back as hard as I'm hitting them, and so I'm gonna have to just reorganize the way the robot's laid out internally to sort of fix some of those dependability issues because we're still gonna win any match we go into as far as energy goes. So if I'm fighting anybody, and I don't care who it is, if we stay spinning, we're going to win the match. End of story. That's just how that's going to work. So we got to fix the dependability issues. That's really what's going to happen. And so from a fan's perspective, is the robot going to look drastically different? Probably not. It's going to look very similar. But if I can address some of those issues, we could get right back up there where we'd be another threat to win another championship.
And I mean, I have every confidence of that because I mean, like Tombstone is just historically, no matter what, I mean, it could win any match. Like that's just a fact. So I think that that's great. Another thing that I wanted to ask is that because of the fact that everybody like prepares so much for Tombstone, like they
Everybody's
all
got a
do.
Tombstone plan. They all
Every
do. Yeah.
everybody has a plan. I mean, does that affect, has that impacted anything for you? Like, do you think over the course of time that because all of these teams have developed these plans that has, hindered anything for you that, like
Well,
now
of course
you
it
have to
makes
kind of
things
develop
harder.
more of a plan?
Yeah, clearly it makes things harder. I mean, one of the the key aspects of winning in this sport is being ready for everybody. Um, but I've probably changed the landscape of the sport more than any other single robot because every robot there has a tombstone plan. Okay, every single one in the pits has something. So they've got their fancy lifters, they got their weapon, they got all this other stuff, and then they say, "What are you gonna do for Tombstone?" And all of them will go under the table and they'll pull out, "See this big hunkin' wedge? Here's my Tombstone plan." Everybody has a Tombstone plan. So, having a couple of seasons where we weren't on top, and we have a couple seasons where the dominant robot has been some sort of vertical spinner, means now a lot of those teams are spending that development time coming up with something specific for those guys, less so than me. Um, and in the long run, that probably should help me because they're spending their engineering time trying to, figure out the fort game at this point in time or something like that. And if they're all these are the smartest people you're ever going to come across, they'll come up with some interesting stuff. I just want them thinking about somebody other than me for a while. And that should help make things easier for me to do what I want to do down the road.
Exactly. I have a really interesting question because, I always ask the teams, if they could fight any robot, who would they fight? I mean, Tombstone is always in that conversation, but for you, I mean, you've been around this whole time. Is there anybody, especially with all of the rookie bots that have come in the past couple of years, that you would want to see Tombstone against, that you would find to be an interesting matchup?
um honestly, at this point, I'd like to see more matchups where we're fighting robots we haven't fought before. And honestly, that's about all I'd say on that. So, there's good robots and good teams that have been there routinely that we just haven't matched up against. And I think some of those would be interesting just because it would be new territory. So, like you mentioned, Huge. We haven't fought Huge. I have no idea what I'd do against Huge. I don't know what my even thought process is. So weirdly effective in the way it's built and how it's driven. I don't know what I would do, but I'd have to come up with something, and that would be an interesting match because we've never done that one before. Um, if Charles is there with Overhaul, I haven't fought that. That would be one that would be tough or interesting. There's robots that have been there for a while that we just haven't happened to come up against. So I would, and some of those are really tough matchups. Copperhead, okay. I don't like my chances against Copperhead. That is one tough robot, but we haven't fought it before, so it'd be like, okay, I'd give it a shot and see what happens. So yeah, at this point, I'd just like to see something different on the other side of the arena than stuff we've already fought before.
Yeah, and I have to mention this because I know it came up in that discussion, but I know Craig Danby in particular really wants Flammo against Tombstone. Um,
Well, him at least I've fought at RoboGames at other events, so we at least do have some piece of history there. But that's another one that I haven't fought that particular version of his robot. So sure, that'd be a fun one to give a shot to.
yeah.
See how many pieces I could pull off.
I know. Well, and the thing that I find the funniest though about teams talking about fighting Tombstone is a lot of them know that they're going to lose, but just want to see how Tombstone destroys them. They just want to see like what happens. So I
Well,
think
and
that that's fantastic.
there's a badge of honor in coming out ahead though. So like if they happen to hold together to the end and they beat me, then that the guy's gonna go, I beat Tombstone, and he'll make a cheap T-shirt that says I beat Tombstone and wear it every day. I mean, it's a badge of honor to say that. So um, I get that. There are teams that we have more of a reputation, not necessarily as just winning, but just as dominant kinetic energy performance. And if you say you come out on top of that, that's saying something. It's a great way to pat yourself on the back. So I know a lot of teams would love their chance. Well, again, like I said, they all have a plan. Everybody's got something ready to fight me. So
They certainly do. Um, so the next thing that I wanted to ask about is, because you've been doing this for so long, for you, what things have changed the most in the sport since when you first started out in it?
Uh, are you talking technical changes, like battery improvements? Or are you talking just the way the events themselves run and feel? I mean, it's there's a couple of things there you can define.
Right. Mostly
Um,
in the robots and the, anything to do with the arena, the arena design and the changes in
right.
that, those types of
Um,
things.
all right. So probably the biggest change. A lot of people will say it's brushless motors and more efficient electronics and stuff like that. I think the biggest change is batteries. Okay. Um, you go back to first version of Tombstone, which was 2004. Okay, it goes back a long time, right? The weapon system was run on lead acid batteries, like you'd start your car with. Big, huge, heavy, useless pieces of junk, right? Um, I can get more power out of a battery that's the size of my fist than I could out of a car battery size lead acid battery now. So the battery improvement has made all of the other improvements possible because, you know, if you have more powerful motors, you still need more powerful batteries. If you have better electronics, you still need to power all this stuff. Some of the design aspects of the different wedge arrangements and the controls and the different weapons and all that stuff, you wouldn't have had weight for any of that stuff if you're still running lead acid batteries. So all of the other improvements still come back to that the batteries are the heart of the robot. I mean, that's where all of your power comes from. And it's amazing how much power you can get out of a small space now. And that changed the whole game. It just changed the way everybody could build their robots.
Yeah. And that's something that like you may not notice that externally so much, but as a builder, that that's made a huge difference in
You
things.
notice
So,
it externally when they catch on fire.
well, that there is that, and that does happen pretty frequently. So yeah, I mean, it certainly, a lot of, especially since Comedy Central days have changed, but I mean, even since BattleBots started more in the modern times, I mean, last season we had the upper deck. That was something that was different.
Yeah.
I think depending on what team I've talked to, some teams liked it, some teams didn't like it, and some teams were just like neutral about it. So
I don't think anybody actually liked it. So most teams were there are teams that could use it and it's okay, it's another tool in the arena, and they're relatively neutral about it. Um, most people didn't like it, and some people, and I'm on that point, hated it. It was just absolutely the worst thing they possibly could have done. They took away a third of the arena as far as where I have to swing the robot around and do anything. So um, to me, it was just as anti-horizontal spinner a piece as they could have done.
that is exactly what I've heard from pretty much everyone else.
Yeah,
So
I and whatever they decide they're going to do with the arena, you have to roll with the punches. That's just part of the game. But yeah, it was not a welcome sight in any way, shape, or form to me.
yeah, definitely. And I mean, to me as a fan, I don't think that it's not what I want to see to do something that is going to give a big disadvantage to certain types of robots and a big advantage to others. I mean, obviously you have to kind of, plan for that and try and design around it as best you can. But I mean, if you're a horizontal spinner flat out, that's probably not going to work out very well for you. So,
Yeah, I don't like it when the arena wins the match.
yeah.
So the robots should be the ones winning or losing, not the arena. And I get it. They want to have some measure of excitement. They want things in the arena to add more to the spectacle of watching the show. But if the arena is winning the match and the robot isn't, I think it's a problem then at that point in time. So
Yeah.
I wasn't a fan.
Yeah. Um, Another thing that I wanted to ask too is just because that was a kind of different thing the past couple of seasons, but about Perfect Phoenix, because normally you're just focused on Tombstone, but then you had this other really great opportunity to have mentoring a young person in BattleBots, to be able to build a robot. I mean, that's especially exciting to me. Like I often talk about on the show, my daughter's 6 years old. She's definitely not at the point of building a robot at this point. She's at the Lego level right now, but
Right,
she
right.
loves combat robotics. I mean, I hope that it's something that she wants to pursue someday. So that had to be really like different and also great for you to have the opportunity to do that.
And I try to help lots of people, so it's not like I picked him and here's one I'm going to mentor. I've done that with quite a few. Tyler's a really good kid. Okay, and I think he was 8 when he started fighting combat robots, so he's actually been at it a while. So it's one of those things where it's like, oh, you're helping this kid go fight at BattleBots. He's got more championships and victories than the vast majority of the people there. Hundreds and hundreds of combat matches in the smaller weight categories, which really hones the Nintendo skills as far as fast hands for driving and whatnot. Kids are really good at that, and he's really one of the better drivers that's there. He's pretty good at it. So working with him's been fun. Rebuilding Perfect Phoenix was a challenge because that actually used to be Paul Ventimiglia's spot a long time ago. So it was brutality when he ran it, and so Paul's a good friend of mine. They ended up making an arrangement to get the robot from Paul, and then here you go. Here's a broken robot. Have fun fixing it. And so getting Perfect Phoenix running both seasons was kind of challenging. It was built for a smaller weight class, so it's well underweight for BattleBots competitions, and so it really wasn't set up to be super competitive now in a 250-pound category. So after this last season, if we run that one again, I'll probably stick with a very similar design, but I'm going to rebuild it from the ground up with a design of it being 250 pounds. So the you're going to see Perfect Phoenix in the Champion series. You'll see it coming up this year. If you see it again in the future from there, it's going to be more of an A game build for me rather than just building getting something running. So um, next time Perfect Phoenix runs, it's going to be one that's going to be an actual serious competitor trying to win.
That's awesome. I'm curious though that if, in those seasons, if you had to end up fighting Perfect Phoenix somehow, ha- you just would have been like, well, I guess, we're gonna fight.
As long as I don't think BattleBots would stack them up just for the fun of it. So the reality is we probably would never fight them in a fight night fight sort of situation. But if they both get in the tournament, they're fighting. I, you know, and nobody's going to pull any punches. It's going to be a knockdown drag out. I mean, that's just they're going to fight. They're going to do their thing, and one of them's going to win, and then I have to fix that one, and we'll have to go forward.
That's awesome. And you mentioned like, with the other robot competition. Speaking of that, you had mentioned the recent announcement of another robot competition coming. So I definitely want to talk about that.
Sure. Okay. So RoboGames just made the announcement that they're going to be having another event in April of next year in Pleasanton. So April 6th through 9th, if I remember correct. So this is a kind of a big deal. So RoboGames is a huge event. So they have all the combat classes from ant weights, 1-pounders, up to heavyweights. But they also do a lot of non-combat stuff. So they have dozens of different types of robot events that are not combat related. So they have line followers and sumo and soccer and maze firefighting. They have just a ton of stuff going on. So there's, no matter what your robotic interest is, there's something there that you can find to interest you. I personally really like their combat arrangement because there's no arena hazards. So it's just you and the other robot, and so then it's more of a clean match in that regard because it's just two robots knocking the crap out of each other. And it's, the competition is pretty fierce. So when you're running BattleBots, the pace is sort of glacial because the magic of TV takes time. So, you have a match, and then you might have another match 45 minutes later or an hour later. I mean, it just sort of drags because they got interviews, they got all of the different things. Those few seconds you see on the screen take forever for them to film and do everything they're doing, right? RoboGames will run a match, they'll run 6, 8, 10 matches an hour, just in and out and in and out. So from an audience perspective, it's incredibly entertaining because you're not sitting there waiting for another match. The broken robots are being taken out while new robots are being put in the arena. I mean, it's just, you keep going, right? From a competitor standpoint, then it's, the pit action becomes even more important than it does at BattleBots because you might have 20 minutes, and if you have to rebuild the entire robot, you better get twisting those wrenches because you got 20 minutes, and if you're not ready, you got to forfeit. So it's a different type of competition. The pressure's just totally different between the two, and I mean, I love them both. They're both fantastic events to go to, but there's something special in my heart for RoboGames because it's where we got a lot of our skills from in all of our matches from there. So I'm really looking forward to their return.
That's amazing. I mean, the more robot competitions out there, I think the better. I recently became acquainted with NHRL, which I watched and was surprised at, just the differences, and it felt so more like, the fans were right there, and the matches are just, one after another, very different, but still exciting. I mean, like you wouldn't know watching on TV when you're looking in this box of these little, 12-pound, 3-pound robots. It's just as explosive and exciting. And I think more fans need to know about that and like realize there's more
Yeah,
out there than just,
pound for pound, the 3-pound class is more competitive, more energetic than any other robots, hands down. So as far as pure destruction and hits go, the 3-pounders are unbelievably vicious. So, the arena is scaled down, like the robots are scaled down. Okay. But it's not, you get a couple of good 3-pounders going at it in there, and you'll get robots bounced off the ceiling 10, 12, 15 times a match, right? You never see that in the big box. They just don't fly that far. With the 3-pounders, they are just wailing on each other for the whole time. And yeah, it's different. It's unbelievably vicious how much is going on in the 3-pound category. So yeah, if you got the opportunity, the streaming they do for NHRL is fantastic. They do a good job in showing stuff there. But to really get the feel of it, you need to go watch it live. Okay. BattleBots, RoboGames, NHRL doesn't matter. To really get a feel of it, you have to go watch it live because then you can kind of sort of get a feel for how much energy is being unleashed. You can't really, video doesn't do it justice.
That I'm sure that's definitely what I keep hearing. I know it's a personal goal of mine to be able to see some live robot fighting in the near future. I know everybody is waiting with much anticipation about tickets for the next season of BattleBots to be going out there. So, that's great. But if not, I mean, I know NRHL is also doing their event in December. That's another
Hmm.
thing to check out. And then
Right.
with the Robo games, I mean, plenty of robot fighting going on. So yeah, I mean, just to kind of wrap it up because we've kind of covered a lot, but I mean, um, I'm really excited for next season. Between with Tombstone and everything. I mean, Tombstone is to me always exciting. Like it doesn't matter what match.
Well,
I
thanks.
always assume that you're gonna win. Like I just do.
Win, win or lose, we're always going to put on a good
Oh
show.
yeah,
Okay. So I don't get upset losing. I get upset if the robot doesn't work correctly and we don't put on a good show. So, um, we'll always put on a good show. That much is guaranteed.
yeah, and I think that that's really the most important thing. I mean, some of my favorite matches, it doesn't matter which robot I necessarily preferred. If it's a great match, it's a great match. And I think that
It's a
most
great match.
people
It's a
that's
great match.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's what they want to see. So
Yeah.
um
You are
amazing.
correct.
Amazing. Well, Ray Billings, thank you so much. Tombstone is a legend, and as many matches as I've seen, I can't wait to see what you do in the future.
We've got some interesting things coming up. Obviously, there's some rebuild plans for Tombstone. Probably going to build something all new for RoboGames, so we'll have a different style of robot for me for that. So, uh, got some interesting things on my plate. So you'll see some cool stuff down the road.
Awesome. Great. So again, I mean, for those who watch the show, definitely make sure that you do all the liking and subscribing, so I can keep putting out amazing content with amazing builders and drivers like this. And we will see you next time on the show.
All that sounds real good. Thanks for having me. This is fun.